Hey, before I kick off the podcast, I just want to shout out Next Door Clothing. Next Door, a clothing brand based out of Bondi in Sydney. They're making really nice jeans and shirts and hats. So go and check out their full range at nextdoorsydney.com. They're also artists, so you can go and check out a range of art. They put on rad parties, and I love what they're doing. So nextdoorsydney.com for the full range. So this is for Clementine and Otis. Terrible happy talks. Terrible happy talks.
Yeah, good to be here, man.
Whoa.
Dude, I'm pumped.
Go. 3, 2, 1.
Alright, let's do this. So today's guest is an author, humanitarian lawyer, philanthropist, former UN aid worker. He's also co-founder of Swiss and US charity Cries. He's a visiting professor at King's College in London, and he has served as an officer in the Australian Army. This week, Andrew joins me from Finland to share his journey, experiences, challenges, and hopes for the future. Professor Andrew MacLeod, welcome.
Thank you.
It's great to have you, and I'd also like to introduce this week's co-host, past guest, and barrister admitted into the Supreme Court of New South Wales, Australia, Mr. Lee Finch. Thanks for being here. Thanks for being here, gentlemen. And it's quite a pleasure, Andrew. I want to get stuck straight into it. The topics we're going to talk about today are quite compelling and also confronting. I will put a little bit of a trigger warning. I guess some of the work that you're involved in is linked to child abuse, sex working and sex trafficking. And I guess my initial question, and I'm asking a heavy question just to start strong, why do you feel so compelled to be involved in humanitarian work of this nature?
Well, when you see a wrong, and you think rightly or wrongly you have the ability to reduce that wrong from happening. If you choose not to, you're then complicit. So part of it is ensuring that you yourself are not complicit. And to give your listeners a bit of a background, because we'll start strong, as you say. I worked for the UN for many years, and what I have seen is an enormous amount of abuse of women and children by aid workers in the developing world. And people will be surprised at that from the start. And I turn around and say, no, think about it this way. As we crack down on predators in the developed world, the rich countries, the predators know they can't go to the schools and the scout halls without a huge risk of being caught. So they go to where there is less of a risk of being caught and more of an opportunity to get access to children. And as the National Crime Agency in the UK says, as we crack down on predatory pedophiles in the developed world, the predators now go to the developing world, and their chosen methodology to get access to children is to join a children's charity. And for your listeners who are now going, hang on, this sounds a bit fruitcakey, I'm going to be like, no, it's logical. It's disgusting, but it's logical. If I stand outside a primary school wearing a trench coat in Melbourne or Sydney, someone will call the police within 15 minutes. But if I stand outside a primary school in the Democratic Republic of Congo wearing a UNICEF T-shirt, carrying a bag of lollies, within 15 minutes, I'm going to have a smorgasbord of choice. And to really highlight this, recently there have been a series of protests in the Eastern Democratic Republic of Congo where the population are asking for the peacekeepers to please leave. And they're asking for the peacekeepers to leave because, A, the peacekeepers are getting a lot of money, B, they are not bringing peace, and C, there are now documented thousands of children born from abuse by peacekeeping soldiers. So when you look at this through the eyes of someone who lives in the Eastern Democratic Republic of Congo, you're coming here, you're wealthy, you're abusing our women, you're not bringing peace. Can you please just leave? And what we see over and over again is predators are now targeting the aid industry as a way of getting access to children in the developing world. This is not a secret conspiracy of pedophiles bringing everyone in, but it is inaction by the industry to fail to prevent by failing to put preventative mechanisms in place and prosecution mechanisms in place when perpetrators are caught. So to come back to your question, Shannon, I first saw this when I was working in Bosnia in the mid-1990s. I worked for the International Committee for the Red Cross, and at the time there was a scandal where UN security staff trafficked 14 and 15-year-old girls out of Moldova into Bosnia, chained them up in a nightclub called Florida 2000 for the exclusive use of UN staff. And for your listeners who doubt that, I suggest they Google the movie Whistleblower starring Rachel Weisz. In many jurisdictions, it's on Amazon Prime or on Netflix. And that movie goes through exactly what I've just said. And a US police officer who worked for the UN security section at the time blew the whistle on this, and she was fired and never worked another day in her life. And this is the track record of the UN and the large NGOs. The whistleblowers get punished and the whistleblowers get fired. This is the mid-1990s. Then in the early 2000s, there was a series of scandals called the food for sex scandals. And again, I say to your listeners, don't believe a word I say. Google this and verify it yourself. And the food for sex scandals were a whole series of refugee camps in Western Africa where families were only allowed in if they handed over one of their children to aid workers for sexual favours. And then there was the Oxfam scandal that we heard about in Haiti, where hundreds of children have been born to UN aid workers and peacekeepers. And at the time, the Haiti scandal was headline news. At that exact time, in Eastern Democratic Republic of Congo, World Health Organization staff were abusing women and children in the middle of an Ebola crisis. So you've got to ask yourself, how much impunity do these abusers feel that in the middle of an Ebola crisis, when abuse by aid workers is headline news all around the world, they still feel free to abuse? So your question is, why do I feel strongly about this? It's because someone's got to stand up and say, enough, stop, let's try and fix it.
Yes, sir. Thank you, man. Now, there's a few things I want to unpack here. So to go back a few steps, you use the word complicit. For those that don't know, complicit refers to covering up. Are you saying that these NGOs are covering up the behaviour of these peacekeepers, these perpetrators at times, by being complacent and not addressing the issue? Is that what you're saying?
Indeed, and it's not just me saying it. The International Development Committee of the House of Commons, the UK Parliament, came out with a report on sexual exploitation and abuse in the aid industry. Their words, not mine. The industry is complacent, verging on complicit, by turning a willful blind eye to the activities that they know what's going on. They accept it as, and this is now I'm paraphrasing, the cost of doing business. And if you went to an aid worker and said, do you accept the abuse of women as the cost of doing business? They would say, no, we don't. Okay, then how come you haven't prosecuted anyone for doing it?
Why do you think it's a willful blind eye, in your opinion?
Because they know it's happening and they haven't done anything to stop it. I think there's a number of reasons. One is they are fearful of the world finding out just how much abuse happens under the auspices of the aid industry, and then fearful that people will stop donating to them. Just like the Catholic Church covered up the abuse for decades, the aid industry is covering up. And just to give you an idea of how high this goes, Kofi Annan, the former Secretary General of the UN, wrote in his book that his largest professional regret was not stopping the genocide in Rwanda. His second largest professional regret, according to him in his own book, was not stopping the pedophilia of UN staff. In his last interview as Secretary General, and you can Google this and find this, Lis Doucette of the BBC did an interview with him and said, Secretary General, you have been saying zero tolerance for sexual abuse for 3 years and nothing has changed. That interview was 17 years ago. Wow. And still nothing has changed.
That mentality of a feeling or a sense of impunity because a person is interacting or being involved in aid work, do you think that's born from Do you feel like that's being abused because it's a developing country and we're here to help, so therefore I'm immune to being persecuted or prosecuted for my behaviour?
So when the Oxfam scandal blew, that is when Oxfam staff in Haiti were found to be paying for prostitutes, and prostitution is unlawful in Haiti. The female chair of Oxfam UK was asked, why didn't you report this to the police in Haiti? And they said, we didn't think they'd do anything about it. Just think about that for a second. They knew it was a crime. They chose deliberately not to report the crime of their own staff to police for law enforcement. Not only that, most Western countries now, UK, Australia, US, have a thing called extraterritorial child sex tourism legislation. Now, to put that in common speak, most countries' law applies in their country. Australian law applies in Australia, US law applies in the US, UK law applies in the UK. But in some areas of law, the government says we're now going to assert a law to our nationals and our residents no matter where in the world they are. So if you abuse a child under the age of 16 overseas, it is unlawful in Australia to do that. You've broken Australian law, and a British person has broken British law, and an American person has broken American law. There was question for some time about whether one of the prostitutes in Haiti was underage. So not only did Oxfam refuse to tell the Haitian police about the breach of law in Haiti, they also refused to tell the police in Scotland Yard. And I went on BBC 3 days running saying Oxfam, need to take the dossier to Scotland Yard and ask to be investigated, which they refused to do until Penny Mordaunt, the Secretary for State for International Development at the time, said, if you don't take the dossier to the police, I'm going to withhold £50 million of funding immediately. And then Oxfam took the dossier down. And one of the problems that we found is one of the prostitutes was indeed 17, which is underage in common person speak, but didn't reach the trigger point of 16 to trigger the extraterritorial law. Now, here's an interesting bit. I chair a law firm in the UK. And what we were going to do was sue Oxfam in the courts in the UK on behalf of the prostitutes for the abuse. However, we needed an undertaking from the government of Haiti not to prosecute the women for the breach of prostitution laws. And the government of Haiti refused, saying, quote, we do not want to scare the NGOs away. So Oxfam knew at their chair level, the government of Haiti knew at the senior most level, the Secretary of State for International Development in the UK knew, and still no one's being prosecuted. So what signal does this send to perpetrators? And Shannon, this is one of the fears I have about raising the issue. We need to raise the issue to stop it. But until we get mechanisms in place to stop it, all we're doing at the moment is telling every predator in the world where they can go and get away with it. So we've got this problem and this dilemma that we have. We've got to raise the issue so we can stop it. But until we stop it, we're actually increasing the amount of perpetrators.
Whoa. It's a big, messy topic. And it is. Go.
And the hardest thing for a lot of people to come to terms with is say, so I've been donating to Save the Children, or I've been donating to Oxfam, or I've been donating to UNICEF. Are you telling me some of that money goes to the abuse of women and children? And I'm saying, yes, it does. Yes, it does. So if you want to do something to stop this, one of the things you can do is before you donate to a charity, ask that charity, how many of your staff have you reported to police for abuse of women and children overseas? And if the answer is 0, don't give them any money, because there's no way on earth that an agency has 0 perpetrators. No way. If they're trying to tell you, no, we've got systems in place and we've not detected anyone, that's because they're not looking hard enough, and it's because they're in absolute denial. To give you an idea of the scale of this, right, just looking at the estimation of prevalence for pedophilia that came out of the child abuse inquiry in Australia. So about 7% of the Catholic clergy participated in paedophilia, according to the Child Abuse Inquiry. The National Crime Agency in the UK estimates that about 3% of the male population have paedophilic tendencies. So where does the aid industry sit? Well, if the common underlying prevalence is about 3%, and an industry that attracts people like the Catholic Church is 7%, and the law enforcement have been warning that predators now target the aid industry is going to be closer to the Catholic Church than the general population. But let's say it's somewhere in the middle. Let's say the prevalence within the aid industry is about 5%. There are 500,000 aid workers in the world today. About 300,000 of them are male, 5% of which is 15,000. Is it a safe starting assumption to say there's somewhere in the order of 15,000 men with pedophilic tendencies working for the aid industry with access to children in circumstances where law enforcement has broken down and they control food, water and shelter? Yes, that's a safe starting assumption. That's the scale. Or, as I like to say to people, this is a problem larger than the Catholic Church. And before you think I'm a fruitcake, just think about it this way. There are more aid workers than there are Catholic priests in more countries than the Catholic Church is present in, with better access to children and controlling food, water and shelter. I don't need to say there's a conspiracy. I just need to say there's a vulnerability. And there is no effective preventative mechanism in place to stop that vulnerability, and therefore perpetrators perpetrate. And if people doubt that and they say, come on, there must be preventative mechanisms. Yeah, really? When's the last time someone went to jail for doing this? And the answer is they haven't.
Is that what you want to do? Do you want to put people in jail?
Yeah, and not just the perpetrators. If I find 2 or more perpetrators working for the same organisation, then I'm going to take a private criminal prosecution against the CEOs and trustees of those organisations for failure to prevent. Failure to prevent a crime in many jurisdictions is also a crime. You will not get change unless you take someone's money or you take someone's liberty. People have to go to jail. And I would only donate, and I would urge your listeners, only donate to organisations that can show you they've reported their own staff to police and those staff members have gone to jail.
Whew. Andrew, wow. Can we touch on the subject of consensual adult sex, or sometimes referred to as sex tourism in developing countries, and the subsequent fallout of participation in that industry behaviour?
So one of the things in the work we've been doing is we've concentrated a lot on the abuse of children under the age of 16. And we've done that for a number of reasons, one of which is we don't want to get caught up in the messy discussion about consent. If the victim of abuse is under the age of 16, consent doesn't come into it. A 16-year-old, someone under 16, cannot consent to sexual activities, transactional or otherwise.
Is that global?
Because, look, the age of consent varies from country to country. The countries that have extraterritorial child sex legislation tend to have that consent at 16, but it's really confusing. For example, Iceland still has the age of consent at 14, Italy at 15, Spain until recently was 13, but they've now lifted it. And even in Australia, the states are different, and there are different circumstances. A lot of states in Australia have what's called Romeo and Juliet laws, and that is you can consent to sex from 12 to 14 if your partner's no more than 2 years older, 14 to 17 if your partner's no more than 3 years older, and after 17, go for it. And if people feel uncomfortable about that, I'd say, well, the way the law used to be written, that is a fixed age of consent at 16, if 2 15-year-olds have sex with each other, both are guilty of statutory rape. Now, that's unfair. Now, should 2 15-year-olds be having sex? Probably not, but should they go to jail if they do? Definitely not. What the law tries to do is criminalise an imbalance of power. 2 15-year-olds having sex, there's no imbalance of power there. That's teenagers exploring. But what is wrong is a 30-year-old teacher having sex with a 15-year-old student, for example. And we now understand, particularly through work of people like Grace Tame, that male teachers shouldn't abuse female students. We've got a long way to go to accept that female teachers shouldn't abuse male students, for example. There's a film starring Claudia Cadavan, which was on BBC iPlayer for a while, called Heartbreak High, in which the hero, played by Claudia Cadavan, is a female teacher, and she has an affair with a male student, and the film ends with them riding off in the sunset about how happy it is. So I actually wrote a formal letter of complaint to the ABC saying you're actually abusing child abuse by a student, and they rejected the complaint. And I wrote back and said, it is clear in my mind that if the perpetrator was male and the victim was female, you'd agree. But because the perpetrator was female and the victim was male, they don't. But let's come back to your question about adult consent, because it gets very, very complicated. Is there genuine consent? If an 18-year-old starving girl trying to get food for her younger sister accepts a $3 payment from a UN staff member in the Democratic Congo to have so-called consensual sex, now, she might have said yes, she might have done it willingly, but she's doing it in the context of what's called survival sex, in which the circumstances are pushing her into it, and the man knows that, and the man is deliberately doing that. Is that genuine and real consent? I don't think so.
Would you describe that as an abuse of power?
Absolutely, without a heartbeat, you know. And to give you an idea of, again, how high this goes, right? So a couple of years ago, the World Food Programme, the United Nations World Food Programme, won the Nobel Peace Prize. I put out a tweet saying, what a shame it is that an organisation that has been responsible for so much child abuse and female abuse has been given this Peace Prize. The deputy head of the communications division globally contacted me and threatened to sue. And I'm like, go ahead. And the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to subpoena your internal documents. And by the way, because I used to work for the UN, I've seen a number of your internal documents, so I know the documents I'm going to be subpoenaing. The documents that you have about the food for sex scandals, the documents you have about the whistleblower stuff. I know you have them because I have read them. Strangely enough, they withdrew the threat to sue, and I got a call then, not from the deputy head of the communications, but the deputy head of the whole organisation globally. And he said, oh, you know, we're trying to do our best, yada, yada. No, you're not. Here's an example for you, I said to him. Here is the name of the hotel in Goma, in the Democratic Republic of Congo, where we know abuse is happening, and it just happens to be the hotel your staff use. Stop it. And he said, well, do you have the name of the victims? No, I don't have the name of the victims that I'm prepared to tell you, but I'm telling you where the abuse is happening. Well, if I don't have the name of the victim, there's nothing I can do. Hang on, I'm telling you where the abuse is happening, and you're telling me you're going to do nothing. There is an Australian working in the Secretary-General's office, Jane, and I've just forgotten her surname, who's the victims' rights advocate. When Sabine Lee and Susan Bartell at Queen University in Canada and Birmingham University came out with a report showing 265 children born to UN peacekeepers from interviews with only 2,000 women, I asked Jane, so what are we doing to compensate those children? Well, they haven't made a formal complaint. Hang on. You know they exist? Yes. You know their names? Yes. You know where they are? Yes. But you're not helping them until they dob in their mothers for being prostitutes. I wouldn't phrase it like that. Of course you wouldn't phrase it like that, because phrasing it like that points out the absolute shame and hypocrisy of the position that you're taking. You're the victims' rights advocate in the UN Secretary-General's office. You know where the victims are. You know their names. You know where they live. And you refuse to give them any meaningful compensation, let alone help them. I mean, obviously now I get upset every time I talk about it, because how despicable is this?
Well,
You know,
this is what... Oh, sorry, Andrew, keep going.
no, that
Well, I want to lead into, though, the human impact on the individual. I know it's obvious, but let's just highlight one more time the impact. There's a physical impact, there's an emotional impact, and I'm assuming there'd be a social impact for an individual. Can you just maybe elaborate on the impact to a victim and I guess the social inequity that is created through these behaviours?
well, at the extreme end, many of the perpetrators choose not to use condoms, right? Part of the abuse, part of the power, because as many people who work in sex crimes will tell you, these are crimes of power, not crimes of sex. They choose to deliberately make their victim vulnerable to impregnation. So the woman gets pregnant, has a child. You are creating multi-generational poverty. And every day for the rest of her life, the woman will look at the child and think, that is the consequence of an rape or an abuse. And then she carries with her a torment for the rest of her life where she loves her child because she carried it, but can't differentiate the child from the circumstances of the procreation. And took $3 to have sex because she needed to eat that night, and now is paying over a lifetime hundreds and thousands of dollars to keep that child alive.
My question, do many of these fathers know they have children?
No, but this, they know that they could have, but this is where we're now evolving into. There was a case in California in the late 70s, early 80s, a guy wandered around and raped and murdered 15 or 20 women and was never caught. And in 2017, a cold case investigator opened the file, found DNA from the crime scene, put the DNA on the national DNA database, and nothing came back. He then thought laterally and compared the DNA to the 23andMe and Ancestry.com databases, found extended family members to that DNA, triangulated backwards, and found the perpetrator. And he's now gone to jail. He was actually an ex-copper. It's called the Golden State Killer Case, and your listeners can Google it. And when I was listening to this in 2017, I thought, hang on, if you can take DNA from a crime scene, compare it to the genealogy databases and find the perpetrator, could I do that with a child? So if a man abuses a woman or a child and she gets pregnant and has a child as a result, can I take, with the right consent and with the right ethical protections around the child, take the child's DNA, isolate the paternal side of that DNA, and then compare it to the 23andMe and Ancestry.com databases and find the father and hold them to account? And the answer is yes, you can. So we've done an experiment in the Philippines where we took DNA from 6 mother-children pairs in the sex slums north of Manila. And out of the 6 mother-children pairs, we found 5 fathers. 2 in Australia, 1 in California, 1 in Canada, 1 in the UK. And we're in various stages of law enforcement against these fathers.
And what's the
so
outcome?
My message,
Oh, sorry.
well, in the best case scenario for a little boy whose father was in California, when we contacted the father did the right thing and said, you're right, that's my child, and he's now paying for the kid's education. This kid is now going to get a US passport, he's going to get their college paid for. So he's gone from a 12-year-old boy in a sex slum to potentially getting a US passport and US college education. That's the best case scenario.
Wow. Positive.
2 twins we had who had a British father. The father took some reluctance until I said, hey, there's 2 ways. We can either come to an agreement quietly or I can sue you publicly and crowdfund this. And he...
But just wait, did you present the evidence to him?
Yeah.
And it was resounding? It was undeniable?
Yeah, I mean, because also the perpetrators know what they've done. You know, the father in Canada, when I approached him, the admissions he gave me straight up. He's like, yes, I used prostitutes. No, I never used a condom, I thought I was infertile, but I later got married and I've got 2 subsequent children. So most of them know what they've done is wrong. And they know there's no such thing as a perpetrator that perpetrates only once. They've done this lots of times in lots of places, and they're like, right, I've been caught. And this is the message we want to pass to potential future perpetrators. Don't think that you'll get away with it anymore, because I'm developing a technology and I'm developing a legal process by which we can catch you into the future. There is an organisation called Children Born of War in Norway, and it's still finding fathers of children born in World War II. So the fathers clearly are dead, but the children who are now in their 70s and 80s want to know their genetic heritage. And we can now find their genetic heritage and connect them with long-lost cousins. And we're saying, you went on a football trip 10 years ago to Philippines, be nervous. Be very, very nervous. I might not catch you today. I might not get you next year. It might be on your 87th birthday that I come knocking on your door, but I'm going to come knocking.
You sound quite militant.
And if you committed a crime, so one of the problems that you've got with sexual offences at the best case is they're very hard crimes to prove, particularly if you're dealing with an adult sex offence where she says I was raped, he says she consented, he says she says, is very difficult crime to prove in the best of cases. If you then make it an overseas sex offence, it even gets harder, and then smart lawyers will turn around and say, what's the custody of your evidence, where's the chain of evidence, yada, yada, yada. Prosecutors very rarely prosecute overseas sex offences because they're so hard to prove, except if the mother is under the age of 16 and I get a DNA report, there's the mother who's now 32. There's the child who's now 20. That's right, the mother was 12 when she had the child. And here's the DNA that proves the father who's now 70. And if he turns around and says, I don't trust your custody of evidence, okay, do the DNA test again. I don't trust your lab. Okay, use your lab. Do it again and again and again. There's the mother. She's 12 years older than the child. Yes, she was 12. Yes, the DNA proves it. Yes, the DNA proves you're the father. Gotcha. And the first time we use this technology to get a conviction, it's going to open the floodgates. And what we have done in the last couple of years is we've been able to show decision makers in the UK and in Interpol it's possible. So there's now a new division in Interpol, the International Police Organisation, called Operation Soteria. And Operation Soteria is aimed at just applying the extraterritorial child sex tourism laws to the aid industry. So we're coming to get you. The momentum's building up.
I don't know if I want to open this can of worms. Would you attempt to extradite a perpetrator?
See, this is the wonderful thing about using the extraterritorial child sex tourism legislation is you charge the father for breaking the law in the father's home jurisdiction.
But so what if he lives in a non-Hague? What if he lives in a non-Hague Convention country?
Wherever he lives, so long as the country of residence and or the country of nationality has extraterritorial law, then you get them under that law. So I, as an Australian living in the UK, if I have residency in the UK and I abuse a child, and I abuse a child in Cambodia, I have broken Australian law because I'm an Australian national. I've broken British law because I'm a British resident, and I've broken Cambodian law. Take your pick. I'll get you in one of them.
Wow. Lee, would you like to weigh in at any point here? Andrew, it's just amazing. And
oh, there's so much fodder here. I mean, I've been writing copious notes. Just briefly, I mean, on that last issue, private individuals can make prosecutions live. In fact, I'm well aware of in New South Wales that can be done. Now, it may be that the evidentiary standard is not initially there to proceed to a conviction, but commencing a private prosecution can bring to the attention of the authorities, and particularly New South Wales, the Director of Public Prosecutions, that there is a private prosecution. Now, they then have the ultimate authority to either take that prosecution.
Lee, can I jump in here and give you
an
actual live example of that? So while I started doing this work and started to get some publicity, I was contacted by a girl. Now, everything I'm about to say is public, so it's okay. I can use the names because it is all public now. It wasn't, but it is now. Daisy contacts me. Daisy was adopted at birth, and when she turned 18, she got her adoption file, and she found that her birth mother was 13 and her birth father was 36. Yep, a 36-year-old raped a 13-year-old, got pregnant, and Daisy was a result. So Daisy's gone to the police and said, "Why didn't you prosecute my father for rape?" To which the police said, "You are not the victim of rape. We can't tell you because of privacy laws." So Daisy's come to me and said, "What can we do?" And I'm like, "Well, you're not the primary victim of rape. Your birth mother is. What does your birth mother say?" And Daisy said, "Well, I contacted my birth mother and my birth mother doesn't want to prosecute." And I'm like, "Well, we've got to respect your birth mother's wishes because whilst you're the secondary victim of rape as a child of rape, because a child of rape is a victim of rape too, you've got to respect your birth mother." She came back to me a few weeks later and said, "Right, my birth mother and I have spoken a lot. My birth mother now wants to prosecute." I'm like, "All right. So now you and your birth mother go to the police in the UK and say you'd like to prosecute. They're going to say no, history, yada, yada, yada. Give them my card and say, I am prepared pro bono to commence a private criminal prosecution on your behalf, and the first thing I will do is subpoena all the files that the police have. And the police will be scared about that, so they will take the prosecution." And that's exactly what happened. Daisy and her mother went to the police. They threatened a private criminal prosecution. The police then took it on, arrested the guy. He went to court and he's been convicted and he's currently doing a 5-year jail sentence now. And this can be Googled and you can verify it all. What people don't understand in common law jurisdictions is whilst the Department of Public Prosecutions, the DPP, normally takes prosecutions, it is open to any private individual to take a private criminal prosecution too. People rarely do because the same evidentiary standards apply and there's a lot of work in it. And Lee, you're right. Often the threat of taking a private criminal prosecution will trigger the authorities into actually taking it over. I suspect, though, that in the Philippines, and we can talk, Lee, a bit about the work we're doing there a bit later. But if we find a mother under the age of 16 at the time of procreation, I suspect if the father's Australian, we will need to threaten to take a private criminal prosecution first before the AFP will respond.
Interesting.
Well, on that, there is an amendment to the New South Wales Crimes Act, and you mentioned being complicit before, Section 316A. It's essentially if you know or believe or reasonably ought to know that a child abuse offence has been committed against another person, and you fail to bring that to the attention of the police, then you yourself are facing potentially a maximum penalty of imprisonment.
And there's an equivalent in the Australian Crimes Act as well for overseas child sex offences. So overseas child sex offences fall under the Federal Crimes Act, not the individual state acts. But there is a provision for certain classes of people, and we need to expand the class, but there's a certain classes of people that if they fail to report an overseas child sex offence, that also is a crime. And we've got to start getting people prosecuted under that.
Wow. Andrew, I want to scale it back a little bit and just get to know you a little bit as an individual. Tell us where you grew up. Where are you from?
I grew up in Melbourne and I barracked for the mighty Magpies, so that's going to put me down a few rungs in a lot of people's minds. But no, I grew up in Melbourne. How
would you describe your childhood?
Oh, it was pretty good. You know, my family gentrified along the same speed as the suburbs that we lived in. No, we grew up in South Melbourne, moved there in the 1970s when it was a pretty dodgy place to be. And as property prices lifted and the place gentrified, so did our family. I went to a nice school. My parents divorced when I was young. I was brought up by a single mother. My mum and dad still got on pretty well, and they made the decision as my brother and I were growing up to live around the corner from each other. As they expressed it, they were always child walking distance away from each other. And in the 1970s, it was bizarre because the Family Law Act had passed during the Whitlam government, which created no-fault divorces. So there was a huge spike in divorces in the 1970s. So we used to tease kids at school whose parents weren't divorced because they only got one Christmas gift, whereas if your parents were divorced, you got 2 Christmas presents. So being a child of divorced parents was the norm in the 1970s as the Family Law Act unfolded. But I had a good upbringing.
Did you enjoy school?
Yes and no. So I was at a school I absolutely hated. And I came home to Mum one day and I said, I hate this school. And she said, well, if you want to change schools, organise it yourself. I went back to school the next day and a friend of mine was moving to a different school the following year. And I said, I'll join you. So I called up the headmaster at St Michael's Grammar in St Kilda and said, I want to come to your school. And he's like, shouldn't one of your parents call me? I'm like, yeah. And so I called my mum and said, Mum, you know how you said if I wanted to change schools, I should organise it myself? She said, yeah. I said, well, call Tony Hewison at St Michael's. I'm going there next year. And she said, oh, bother, used another word than bother. Oh, bother, don't tell your father until I've signed the papers. So I got myself to another school in St Michael's I absolutely loved. I really fitted into that culture of the place. And one of the big things about St Michael's is they really put a lot of emphasis on outdoor education, the whitewater rafting, the rock climbing and things like that. And I was a great beneficiary of that, and I loved it. It turned me around. So now one of the things I do, I sit on the board of the Outdoor Education Group, which is the company set up by St Michael's in the 1980s to run this stuff. So this is part of my give back to make sure we can expand as much as we can, whitewater rafting, rock climbing, not just to the elite private schools, but through a foundation that we've now set up, the Outdoor Education Foundation, to increase the amount of children from underprivileged schools that can also benefit from that sort of education. So my time in Melbourne was good. Then I bombed out of my first year of university. It was first year arts at Monash, and I went to every lecture and every tutorial, but failed to hand in a single piece of work. So strangely enough, failed, got kicked out, and I went and got a job as a dishwasher on Hayman Island in Queensland. Still one of the best jobs I've ever had. 8 hours a day washing dishes, 16 hours a day living on a tropical island, the Whitsundays. Now, in my life, I've had the good fortune of going to, so far, 154 countries in the world. Nowhere is as beautiful as the Whitsundays. It really is my favourite part of the world. So I had that job. And then one day I got a call out of the blue from Mum. I was 20, she was 45, and she said, I've just been diagnosed with a brain tumour. I'm going to be dead in 3 months.
I'm sorry.
So how worse for her. So I went back and looked after her while she died, and she didn't take 3, she took 6 months because she wanted to make it to my 21st so she could give a speech about the women of the Nile family, because at my older brother's 21st, my dad gave a speech about the men of the MacLeod family. Mum said, bugger that, I'm going to talk about what the women have done in your life. And then
sorry,
she
can
said,
I just jump in?
Yep.
Oh, sorry, you go, sir. Go.
And then the last thing she said to me before she died is, I want you to go back to university. So I did, and got my law degree and focused on war crimes, crimes against humanity and genocide. Then got picked up by the Red Cross to work in the law of armed conflict in former Yugoslavia and Rwanda, which is where I started to see the aid world, which is where I started to see some of these abuses. The rest is history.
Wow. If you don't mind me asking, what did your mother do for a job?
She was a teacher.
Interesting. What subject did she teach?
She was actually a career guidance counsellor at Moorabbin Technical College.
Interesting.
Which wasn't one of the top line schools, now TAFE College. She could have done a lot more with her life, but she was also stuck in that vortex of the 1960s. Women didn't know whether they should have burnt their bras with Bettina Arndt or become the good Catholic housewife. Mum chose to be the good Catholic housewife, which was the wrong decision for her. And my older brother is only 9.5 months older than me, so do your maths on that. So she found herself in a marriage that she really shouldn't have gone into, with 2 children under the age of 1. So it's not a surprise she walked out on my dad. No fault to my dad. It's just Mum made the wrong decision for herself. And it was only when I left school and started to stand on my own 2 feet that she could live her own life for the first time in her life, and straight away diagnosed with a brain tumor. And she said to me while she was dying, she said, "This is just brutally unfair. I've never got to live my life."
Were humanitarian causes close to her heart?
No,
Always?
not really. No.
I'm just curious as to. I'm curious because I asked this question because you led into your aid work that you and the subjects that you were drawn to at university. I want to know why you were drawn to those subjects.
So the trigger point was, so I went back to uni because Mum said, please go back to uni, and then she died, so I thought better do that. But I still didn't know what I wanted to do. And Mum used to say, if you don't know what you want to do, create as many options as you can and choose the best option at the time. So I'm sitting there in a law degree because that gives you a lot of options. I'm like, I don't know what I'm going to do. And in second year law, Michael Tate, who was then Federal Minister for Justice and a senator from Tasmania, came to give us a lecture on constitutional law. And halfway through, he stopped and he said, actually, I don't want to talk about constitutional law. I want to talk about having a law degree. And he said, having a law degree doesn't grant you a happy life and a wealthy existence. It imposes upon you an obligation to use your skills for the betterment of other people. And I sat bolt upright and I went, that's it. Use your skills for the betterment of other people. And then I thought to myself, you can do it locally, you can do it in your city, you can do it in the state, you can do it in your country, you can do it globally. And I'm a bit of a narcissistic bastard, so I think I can save the world. Therefore, I have to. And if you want to make the world better, you don't make the world better by working with good people and keeping them good. You make the world better by working with bad people and making them less bad. And that's how you get improvement. So I'm like, all right, if you really want to make an impact, you've got to go to the worst parts of the world, dealing with the worst people and making them a little bit less bad. And that is people perpetrating war crimes in horrible places. So I said, that's it. I'm going to focus on doing law of armed conflict, and I'm going to go and work for the UN High Commission for Refugees or the International Committee for the Red Cross. And I had the good fortune of doing both.
Which you've done. And my question is, it must be very hard to not become pessimistic at the situation. Do you have moments where you feel that the problem's too big? And do you think to yourself, am I dreaming? Am I dreaming that I can actually make a real change?
No, I don't ever think that. I don't ever think that because I use the serenity prayer, and I've got to say, I'm not a religious person. I'm an atheist. I've done a master's of theology because I'm fascinated at religion as a political control, but I'm an atheist. But the serenity prayer goes, Lord, give me the strength to change the things I can, the serenity to leave the things I can't, and the wisdom to know the difference. So whenever I look at a problem, I go, right, can I fix it? If the answer is yes, well, fix it. If the answer is no, don't sweat on it. Just find the next thing you can fix. There are plenty of problems in the world. Go and pick one and try and fix it. You're never going to solve them all. And if you've bitten off too big a goal,
I love that.
Start a little bit smaller.
I love that.
When I started this in 2009, I saw, when I worked for the UN in the Philippines, the way some of my colleagues behaved. So I simply started this by reporting it to my boss. This is wrong. And it's just slowly escalated over the years from there as I've realised there's more I can do and no one else doing it. My cousin's child, for example, he's 19, he's big on climate change. Why don't you do anything about climate change? And I'm like, well, it's because people like you are doing it. Now, why aren't you doing anything about child abuse? Pick the issue that you want to influence and try and influence. You're not going to do everything. You're not going to do close to everything. So just pick something.
Is that what gets you out of bed in the morning?
Yeah. And there's a couple of things that get me out of bed every morning. One is I have a continual thirst to learn. So I like to travel and go to different places and meet different people. And when I hear stories about such and such culture does this or such and such culture does that, I'm like, oh, let's go and have a look. And let's talk to people. Let's sit down. I describe myself as, I can put on jeans and a T-shirt, sit in donkey shit and talk to a local villager, or I can whack on a suit and tie and chat to a president and translate between the two. It's not something that many people can do. And I love it, and some of some of the greatest lessons I've learned have been from street kids. Street kids have got a wisdom and a street smart. And if you sit down and talk to them and treat them like human beings, you can learn a lot from them. So what gets me out of bed each day is a wanderlust, a desire to learn, and the knowledge that you take that learning and apply it every day to try and do good. And the older I get, the more the trick now is to not do good yourself, but to inspire other people too. And pick the young people in the next generation to motivate, to inspire, to encourage, and hopefully to pass on some of the joie de vivre that life is a bloody good thing, and it's a shed load better than the alternative.
Like young lawyers?
No, I actually am picking the children of friends of mine. I've never got married, never had kids, and that's been a conscious decision. So I look at the children who are close to me and I go, which ones are themselves developing their natural empathy for other human beings? Which ones will be open to lessons to learn and slowly start to encourage them? And with the permission of the parents to also slowly bring them into part of the work I'm doing, because you've got to also then tread a fine balance that when a teenage kid is upset about their life, no matter where the teenage kid is, you've also got to encourage them to look at what they do have in life, not what they don't have in life. And one of the things I learned from some street kids in Rwanda, for example, in 1998, when I was coming home, they knew I was in the army, so they would salute. They're like 12, 13, and they're like, come on, let's play a game of football, soccer, not real football, soccer. But before we can play some soccer in the street, we've got to make the ball, don't we? So they run into the garbage tip and they grab some rubber and grab some stuff and they make a little ball and then we kick the ball in. And they're the happiest kids in the world because they've got a ball. And then you go to Australia and a kid hasn't got the latest PlayStation, so they're upset. So how do you take these experiences and show a kid who doesn't have the latest PlayStation that actually they've got a PlayStation? And, I was in this meeting once and I came out in Rwanda and I was with my Swiss colleague and she immediately lit up a cigarette. This little street kid comes running up, "Donnez-moi une cigarette, give me a cigarette." And I said, "C'est très mal pour la santé, very bad for your health." And this kid takes a step back, puts his hands up and he says, "Monsieur, regardez-moi, sir, look at me." And I look him up and down. He's got scabies, his skin's falling off, he's got no shoes. And I'm like, you want to know something, kid? If you live long enough to get cancer, you're lucky. Here, have a cigarette. So we sat down and we had a chat. And then he came out with one of the greatest pearls of wisdom I've ever heard. Problem with people in rich countries is you think education is a right, and I know it's a privilege. He would have done anything just to go to school. And I meet child after child after child in underprivileged areas, and all they want to do is go to school because they understand education is such an empowerer. And then you come back to countries like Australia and you meet kids go, "Oh, I hate school." It's like, really? I mean, I know I was like that. If only I had someone who could somehow gently have brought me into this. Like, one of my godsons is 12, 13, and he's having a bit of a whinge. He says, "Oh, my life is so hard." And with his parents' permission, I just unloaded on him. Your life is hard? Let me tell you about a kid in Philippines who Lee knows. She just turned 13 yesterday, actually. And her mum's a prostitute, her grandma's a prostitute, and she's at real danger of falling into that trade. In fact, we had to do an emergency intervention to rescue her from the circumstances she was in. And I said to this kid in Australia, "You're very lucky you're not this girl. And let me tell you about this girl's life. And you are within 2 or 3 months of the same age as her. And I'm as emotionally invested in this child in Philippines as I am in this child in Australia. And how do I take the lesson from one and apply it to another?" And that's a very difficult thing to do. And what I'm trying to do now is inspire the kids with the good fortune of having been born in Australia to then use that good fortune.
How are you doing it on a bigger scale?
Well, I'm one person, and I've done some interesting and good things in my life. And if I can inspire 3, then it's tripled. And Michael Tate inspired me. And what he used to say is, you throw out seeds and you never know which one grows. And your job is just to just grow others, grow others, grow others.
Is this what's consuming most of your time at the moment, like your work with the charity Hear Their Cries? So I just want to, again, to help inspire people through your work, are you able to derive a full-time income that you can survive on through this work?
No, this cost me a fortune.
That's what I'm curious about.
I underwrite it. So I live a pretty good life.
Or is it your work as a professor?
Well, no, most of my income derives from chairing a law firm, but it's not a huge income. What I have is low expenses. As I said, didn't get married and didn't have children. And if you think how much marriage and children costs you, I don't have that. And people say, geez, you travel a lot. How do you afford your travel? And I said, well, I spend 1.5 children's private school fees on travel each year. You have children, I travel. I'll give you numbers.
You don't have to.
No, I don't mind giving numbers because it's worth it. Because your listener will go, oh, you're chairman of a law firm, you must be rich. It's like, no, I get nowadays about 120,000 Aussie dollars in income. I have other investments that have built over time. And I've got to say, I don't come from a wealthy background. I remember a point where I had $1.58, half a pack of macaroni, half a pack of cheese, half a tank of petrol and accommodation, paid for 5 days at Reef Oceana Village in Queensland before I got my job as a dishwasher on Hayman Island. So I've built it up from there. There's only been 5 years in my life where I didn't improve my net worth. 3 of those were during the global financial crisis, and 2 of those were when I was running for Parliament around 2001. So I've just slowly, by being disciplined of spending less than you earn, slowly save a bit of money. Which means that I still spend less than I earn. So I'm owning a little over 100,000 Aussie dollars a year. So I spend a little less than $100,000 a year. And my aim is to improve my net worth. And then what I'd love to do is create a series of charitable foundations that my friends' children then run and test them. Put small amounts of money into a charitable fund and say, righto, you're not going to get any money out of this. You're just going to get the joy out of giving away money. And if you don't get enough joy out of giving away money, fine, I'll give that money to someone else to give away. And that's what I want to evolve into. But then there's this kid, Lee and I working with him in the Philippines. She says she'd love to be a cabin crew. I mean, she's just turned 30. She wants to be a cabin crew on an airline. And she said, how's this for a discussion that you have with a 12-year-old? I don't want to be a prostitute like mummy. It's like, what a conversation to have with a kid. She says, I want to be a cabin crew. All right, let's have that dream. Let's get her through school. But I said to her the other day, if you get through school and you go to university and you become a lawyer, you could help children like you. And her eyes lit up and her face lit up and she said, I want to do that. And imagine if you take a kid out of the slum and find a way of getting her through school, through all the challenges a standard teenage girl would have, plus all the other challenges she's got. Imagine if you then empowered her to do what I'm doing. How much stronger her voice is than mine because A, she's female and B, she's from the developing world. I mean, mate, if you can do that, if you can simply inspire 2 or 3 other people, that'll do. That'll do.
Yeah, and these are amazing messages, Andrew, especially for people that may be inspired and want to follow your trajectory. And I just want to clarify why I was sort of asking about how you, from a practical perspective, how you derive income to sustain your work and your sense of purpose and your mission. So thanks for sharing that. It's really nice of you to be open.
Yeah, and it's
I know Lee used to live in a van. As a barrister in a van.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, it's a commonality in the message here is this. Rule number 1, if you want to develop financial security later in life, is to spend less than you earn. That's it. So don't go putting, a fast car on a credit card. I had a Mazda Capella for years. I loved it. Then I got a Datsun 1600. That was an awesome little vehicle. Don't go getting a car loan for $25,000 or $30,000 above what you can get. Don't put your holiday on a credit card. Don't do those things.
How do we instill this sense of gratitude in, I guess, a Western society and people who haven't been exposed to impoverished communities and the struggles of a developing country? That's my, I guess, curiosity.
It's a really difficult thing to do because you don't want to make people feel guilty. The ABC ran a program a little while ago, and I saw the trailer on it where a little 11-year-old girl was saying in the trailer for this program, "I know I come from a white privileged country and I feel guilty about that." And I'm like, that's woke gone mad. Anything you do to make an 11-year-old girl feel guilty because of where she's born, that's nuts. You should never feel guilty about being born into privilege. You should only feel guilty if you do nothing with it. And that's the challenge, is you go, okay, I can't help where I was born. And it's made me very, very fortunate. I've got to recognize that, but now do something with it. Only feel guilty if you do nothing with your privilege. Do not feel guilty about your privilege.
Oh, these are good messages. Oh, it's almost like a good way to end. It's just so powerful. And your passion and your sense of conviction is so profound, Andrew. I think that is your innate power that's going to inspire people, which you have already done, obviously.
Where it really comes from, if I boil it right down, is what I call the day before you die test. If someone says to you, you're going to die tomorrow, how do you evaluate your life? And only you can evaluate your life, whatever's important to you. And just in case you think that's a little bit extreme, that's exactly what happened to Mum. You've got a brain tumour, you're going to die. Sure, it's not tomorrow, but it's only 3 months' time. And when she said, I've never got to live my own life, that's when I realised, shit, I better live my life to make it worthwhile. Not just for me, but for her as well. And the old saying, plan like you're going to live forever, but live like you're going to die tomorrow. So give yourself that optionality to do things, but do something every single day. Just do something. And in this, Shannon, I don't tell people what they should choose. Like when I talk about the charities I'm in the process of setting up for my French children, I'm not telling them what their charities should do. They decide that. And when I say you should do something with your privilege, I'm not telling you what it is. You decide that. Whatever's important to you. It could be local. It could be in your city. It could be in your state. You can have a big impact on a small number of people, or you can have a small impact on a large number of people. Neither is right nor wrong. Both are needed. You choose what's right for you, but do something.
Do something. And education.
Yeah.
Again, I mean, I'm a teacher. I'm a high school teacher. So I believe in education. I believe in public education. I just think it should be free for all. And again, I'm sitting here just like I've got a man crush on you because you're advocating for education because you've seen it in globally and you now, and I'm not saying you're old, but you have a lot more life experience than me, obviously.
I'm 55.
And now you can really speak with authority on how important it is, especially in regards to your aid work as well, in terms of making change. And I feel like I'm sitting across a change maker, and it's so great to get into the mind of a change maker. So thank you. Lee, as a man of the law, Lee, a barrister, why is Andrew inspiring to you?
Well, that was going to be my very first phrase. I mean, he certainly inspired me. When I learned of Andrew, I'd already done some work in the Australian courts and had secured parentage testing and DNA for a little girl in the Philippines. She was 2 at the time. She's now 6. It was her first day of school this week. And I actually went to the Philippines and we're about to get citizenship for that little girl. But it's taken a while to get the mother to come around to that idea. But my role, which Andrew has inspired me, is that with my skill in the Australian courts, I can provide the mothers and the children the access to justice that they need. And if it's, Andrew said, well, you can help one child a lot or a lot of children a little. At the moment, I've made a great difference in that child's life. But that's only because of the Australian court system here and the Family Law Act, which has been enacted, which really puts into play the Convention and the rights of a child. And funnily enough, I found out today that the Philippines signed the Convention on the 26th of January 1990, funnily enough, Australia Day. So any child who is born to an Australian father in the Philippines, it's my goal, with the skills that I have, to ensure that father is exercising their responsibilities, to provide the children that they sire, to provide those children with their inalienable rights, which is education, health, and all those privileges which Andrew has so rightly rephrased. They're not rights so much as they're privileges. Andrew certainly inspired me, and that's just part of my practice now. And if I can do that again and again and again, to ensure that those children who are Australian receive the full rights afforded to them by Australian law, then yes, he certainly inspired me to
look. I want to start sort of wrapping up a little bit, but I do want to just touch on one more thing, that I actually had this written down, and it is a little bit controversial. So, prostitution, for example, there's a saying that goes with prostitution that it's the oldest profession in the world. Andrew, I'm sure you've heard of that saying.
Yeah.
Are you basically sending a message that if you're a sex tourist, you should be trembling in your boots?
Yep.
Is that what
Absolutely.
you're saying as well, Lee? Okay.
Yeah, I mean, so let me just reinforce something. This technology we're developing is an evolving technology, and it will continue to evolve. And as I mentioned before, children born of war are still reuniting the genetic history of children born in the 1930s and 1940s. If you have abused a woman or a child overseas and she's become pregnant, we can get you this year, 5 years, 20 years, 40 years. It might be after you die that your children suddenly realise you're an abuser, and that will be your family legacy.
Wow, it's powerful, man. It's powerful, and it's almost like I said. I feel like there's a sense of like it's like this militant approach that's necessary to tackle such a deep and, I guess, messy problem. It really is. There's no other way to describe it in my opinion. But I just am so, in awe of your courage of both of you for taking this on and trying to make a difference in so many lives and there is such a huge knock-on effect. And you use the word legacy. I mean that's deep, that's profound, and it's really something to consider. So thank you. Now, I ask all guests, Andrew, to come to the podcast with a cause they want to support or advocate for. So, obviously, you've got one, and you are the cause. But can you maybe delve a little bit into some ways my listeners can either be of service, support, donate, be involved?
All right, there's two big things that your listeners can do. One is go to the website of Hear Their Cries. Hear as in ear, there as in them. So hear, H-E-A-R, there, T-H-E-I-R, cries, C-R-I-E-S. Listening to the cries of whistleblowers, listening to the cries of the victims. If you want to donate, click on the donate button there, heartheircries.org. Or if you prefer to donate to another charity and you're still like Save the Children or you're still like UNICEF, I would say only ever make a donation after the organisation has proved to you that it's doing something to stop the abuse of women and children, which must, at the minimum, include the reporting of staff for abuse. And if any charity you donate to says that we don't have staff or we haven't had to report them, they're not taking it seriously. The higher number of people they're reporting to the police, the more likely you should donate money, because the higher number they're reporting, the more seriously they're taking the issue. If someone says we don't have a problem, don't give them money, because they are denying the problem.
Okay, I'm just jotting this down. And this information and the links to Hear Their Cries will be in this episode's show notes. So if you scroll down, click on the link, educate yourself, learn about it. And again, like what Andrew said, I'll write down verbatim what he just mentioned in terms of checking out the organisations and their level of reporting. Seems like the most pertinent thing to investigate, correct? So Check it out. You can find this episode on a variety of platforms other than the one you're listening to now, such as Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Buzzsprout, Stitcher, iHeartRadio. And as always, whatever platform you prefer to listen on, it always helps if you subscribe, leave a comment, leave a review. And if you have any more questions about this topic, I think I'll personally advocate for educate. Andrew, I don't know what your level of comfort is with people reaching out to you to get more information, but if you are comfortable with that, maybe I'll put a link to your contact details, whether it's be through social media platforms or through email.
Yeah, or via Hear Their Cries.
Yeah, and maybe Lee, I don't know what your level of comfort with that is as well, because I know that you have a lot of knowledge and understanding around these topics, and you work in the family law court system here in Australia. So what do you suggest?
Well, can I just say one thing on that? Can I just add one thing on that? If there is anyone listening in any country in the world, especially a mother with a child born to an Australian man, or suspects that a man is the father and he is Australian, contact me, contact Andrew, because I'm on the ground and I can get in the courts and we can get the DNA testing.
Andrew, do you need more lawyers like Lee in other countries?
We do. We need lots. We need lots. I mean, we're dealing with a handful of people, but how many children are born of abuse like this? Thousands, if not tens of thousands. Absolutely,
so you need lawyers on the ground. You need lawyers on the ground in a variety of countries. Is that correct?
So this is actually quite complicated. So if a child is born of an abuse in Philippines, what you need to do is have the paternity recognised in the habitual domicile of the child, in this case Philippines, and then have that recognised in Australia. What we'd love to do is initiate a case in Australia and have that precedent overturned, where you can say, well, if ultimately the courts of the father are going to enforce a judgment against the father, why can't we initiate the trial in the habitual domicile of the father? Because with DNA evidence, it doesn't really matter where you start. So they're actually quite complicated cases. And it's amazing some of the people that fight against you in this. Even academic feminists are saying, as middle-aged white men, we have no right to participate in this debate. We're parts of a secret right-wing conspiracy to destroy foreign aid. This has all been thrown at me before. And some have even said, oh, come on, these mothers are only after money, to which my response is, and they're entitled to it. And they're entitled to it. Oh, gosh, horror, a mother wants to get from the father some funding for the child, as if that's a wrong thing. And some people even turn around and say, but she consented, and because she was a prostitute, that's her fault. No, A, it's not her fault. B, that's not how it works. And C, what they miss when they raise criticisms like this is it's about the right of the child. It doesn't matter what the mother and the father have done. It's the right of the child. So, yes, we need more lawyers because this is incredibly complicated areas of law that we need to, over time, simplify. And I would love if the Australian government, Canadian government, British government, American government got together with, for example, the government of the Philippines and start funding this. I mean, what a way to do foreign aid is to put money into the hands of the mother and the child from the father's pocket. From the father's pocket. And if we spark this as a foreign aid program just to get it going, and you could cost recover from the father.
Wow. Especially when you have a developed country and a developing country, and the financial inequity difference is vast. It feels like a very obvious way to go about it.
Yeah.
Wow. Oh, well, what an episode. Like, feel like I've just learnt so much, Andrew and Lee. And before I do finish up, like, have you said everything you feel like you need to say? Is there anything you'd like to finish on, add? Have you got it? Because I really, the reason I feel compelled to have you on is I really genuinely want to give you a platform to speak, get it all out. I'm going to edit. I'm virtually going to do no editing. It's going to be raw audio almost, except for maybe little tweaks to the mastering of the sound. But if there's anything you guys want to add before we go, please, this is your opportunity.
Evil triumphs when good women do nothing.
Thank you very much to social justice warriors, Mr. Andrew MacLeod and Lee Finch. Thank you, gentlemen.